So good evening, everyone. The topic today, we're moving on a little bit from the election, even though the election hasn't happened yet, but it's all over bar the voting, really, other than to try and encourage as many people as possible, particularly in key seats, to, vote the Tories out wherever possible, because the prize is the Liberal Democrats in second place, as a benefit to literally everyone, maybe even a benefit to the Tories in the long run. So I'm going to move on to the immediate problems that Labour are going to have to face with, the immediate challenge they're going to face. We know about their 6 first steps. That's what they say their initial challenges are, but there are actually quite a few. I've got a bit of a list ready, but before I put that up, Tilly the Coder has asked a very good question, and it's very much related, so I will start with this. So Tilly said, why is Labour saying they'll implement the Cass report when it's clearly transphobic and based on pseudoscience? Many academics have criticised it. They have not said they will implement it. You maybe are intended to think they will. Let us have a look at the manifesto, because it mentions the Cass report. I'm just going to go a quick grab here. I've not done this because I only saw the question slightly. Boo, boo, boo. And this is where we see the tricksiness of politics. So this is what Labour's manifesto actually says about the Cass review. We will work to implement the expert recommendations of the Cass review to ensure that young people presenting to the NHS with gender dysphoria are receiving appropriate and high quality care. So that does not say they will implement the Cass report exactly as it's stated. Remember the tricksiness of words. In politics, words, if words are chosen by people who understand politics, they're chosen very, very carefully. So we will work to implement the expert recommendations of the Cass review. And the focus is on the quality of care for young people. So anything that is actually pseudoscientific immediately is therefore by definition not an expert recommendation, is it? So they haven't. Again, I'm quite happy, if people want to say, well, I'm going to be a bit cynical about that. Okay. But language is important. If they had actually intended to implement the Cass report in full, and remember, Labour was saying as soon as the Cass report came out, basically, oh, thank you very much. Yeah, very good report. Yeah, we're all about reports. Yeah, we're going to really take a look at it. They didn't themselves get any expert analysis of it before they came out with their statement. So, and they still won't have done. So that's what I would say about that. But there is actually one other little comment I wanted to pick up on. Em's actually said there, if the Lib Dems are the largest opposition party, things should be very interesting. It should be extremely interesting. What are my thoughts on how the public narrative go in that scenario? It's really simple. It's like every time there's a question time, I'm sure they'll put a Conservative in there somewhere, but there'll have to be a Lib Dem, there'll have to be someone from Labour. Laura Kunsberg, there'll have to be a Lib Dem, have to be someone from Labour. Everything. It has to be from that. It has to be from that every time. As well as the fact that they will lead the questions, not just in PMQs. I know PMQs gets a lot of attention. It's every debate in Parliament. Every debate where a minister, whether it be a cabinet minister, secretary of state, or a minister of state, every time a Labour minister stands up at the dispatch box to lead a debate on some aspect of government policy, it would be the Liberal Democrat opposite number who faces off against them. Now, there is an element to which you could say, because realistically the Liberal Democrats cannot win enough seats to shadow all of Labour's ministers, maybe some sort of arrangement has to be made whereby, okay, maybe the Conservatives do some shadowing as well, but the Lib Dems will be able to, MPs are going to have to come up with some system, and Lib Dems can grab whichever shadow ministerial positions they like. So they will get to pick and choose that. So they will decide it all. But there was another question about the EU and our attitude to the EU. So obviously we know what Labour's stated position on the EU is in terms of those 3 red lines. but they're the only red lines, and none of those red lines can be crossed in the next Parliament anyway. And for the following Parliament, you have a different manifesto. If you change some things, okay, that's normal, that happens, right? What I would say is, first of all, we know that a majority of the country are not impressed with Brexit. Granted, not necessarily a majority of the public would necessarily agree on what we should do about it, or even what we should do about it first. But what I'm going to say is the next Parliament isn't what the Parliament we've just had is the most pro-Brexit Parliament we've ever had, because it was created that way. You know, in the previous parliaments, the previous two parliaments, which had to be sort of Brexity from the Conservatives' point of view, they were really just going along with it and hoping to limit the damage to keep their party together. Whereas Boris Johnson effectively demanded of all Conservative candidates in 2019 that they had to be signed up to his vision of Brexit. Now, yes, there will have been a few in there who were just pretending. Tobias Ellwood, for example, obviously, because he's the only one who stuck his head above the parapet. There would have been a few others pretending as well, of course, but they haven't stuck their head up. Think about it this way. Every time Tobias Ellwood has stood up and thought, well, maybe we should think about the single market here because this is not going well, he's had no support from his Conservative colleagues ever. Plenty of attacks, no one sticking up for him. So we've had, in the last Parliament, a very Brexity Parliament. We are now going to get a Parliament with very little Brexit sentiment in it. There's going to be, you could probably count the number of Lexiteers who will be left in Parliament on the fingers of, well, at least your hands. I don't think you're going to need your toes. And even with there's going to be a much diminished number of Conservatives. Most of the hardened Brexiteers are going to be gone. We know there's going to be a few left. There's not going to be many of them. It's going to be a pro-EU Parliament. And the importance for that is it means debates can start to become a bit more serious. And it really doesn't matter whether the Labour leadership, trapped between a rock and a hard place, wants to have those debates. Those debates are going to start happening. Within a few years, I think, I'm always a bit careful about predicting too much 3 years in the future in politics. I think we're going to be, and I'm not saying it's going to turn around completely and everything's going to be all open and honest and all the rest of it, but I think we're going to have moved to a very different place, really. What Angry Pagan saying, for me, ecology and environment policy is extremely urgent. They are extremely urgent. Hope Labour do take it seriously. It isn't being taken as seriously as it should. So it is extremely urgent. But it's like NHS waiting list. That is extremely urgent. And although action will have to begin immediately, and there's action that can begin immediately, and some of it will begin immediately. Remember, one of the first things Labour are going to be doing is their planning reforms. That's not just about housing. That's about energy as well. That's about... Remember, Labour are still committed to getting ourselves ready for 2030 for electric car, basically the assumption being that new cars sold in this country are electric cars. That's still on. That's still Labour's commitment. So they have to massively boost the energy grid, and obviously with clean energy. So they are going to get onto that. But when I say urgent problems, I mean, let's say you talk about, the climate emergency. So does it make a difference if Labour get cracking on with it on day one or 3 months later? In the grand scheme of things, no. It's urgent, but there are some things that they're going to be faced with on day one. So let's have a little look at the ones I've gathered together from various reports. So let's go down the list. The one at the top is hot off the press from last night, really, but reported, I think, today properly. So Port Talbot, it's in Wales. It's one of our basically two remaining proper steel production facilities. The other one's just down the road from me. So Port Talbot, because there's tricksiness there. They are transitioning. We're transitioning steel in this country from the use of blast furnaces, which unfortunately by their very nature are massive carbon producers. There are alternatives to it, but maybe we don't think they're economical. I don't know. But blast furnaces themselves, massive carbon producers, but it is how we produce, virgin steel. But we're transitioning to arc furnaces, which it's not like a low carbon version of the same thing. Arc furnaces can only recycle steel, but I suppose, but that's the plan. That is Labour's plan. And the steel industry are sort of okay with that. What we're not okay with is steel companies closing down their blast furnaces before the arc furnaces come online. Because obviously what Labour need to do is they're trying to transition jobs from high carbon to low carbon jobs. But what they don't want is a massive several years in between where the jobs just get lost from the high carbon stuff before the low carbon jobs come online. And also remember, an arc furnace doesn't take as many workers to deal with as a blast furnace, because blast furnace, you've got everything to go with it, like the coke ovens and all the rest of it. So basically, because there's some industrial action going on in Port Talbot related to them trying to... The bosses at Tata Steel are threatening to just shut down both of the blast furnaces next week. Like, literally as soon as they've announced this before the election's even happening. So everyone's now going, hang on a minute, what's going on here? They're trying to argue that it's, if there's industrial action, we can't safely operate the blast furnaces, which is a nonsense, because the unions are talking about how they do that, because it's not in the union's interest that the blast furnaces are not operated safely. Because the whole point of the strike action is to keep them going until the arc furnaces are online. But anyway. So that's a crisis that Labour have to sort out on day one, because they can't let Tata Steel shut down those blast furnaces early. Otherwise, that's it. Port Talbot's finished. It's gone. Labour's first act will be... Because once you've shut a blast furnace down, you ain't starting it up again. So... that is something they have to do immediately. That'll be Johnny Reynolds, I imagine. Next one is councils going bankrupt, because obviously after, over a decade of having their central budgets cut and not being able to raise enough revenue themselves and cutting service and everything, the whole thing's... and also Rishi Sunak boasting about the fact he moved money from struggling Labour councils to affluent Conservative councils. Remember, he boasted that. So he's deliberately made it look like Labour councils are doing worse with their funding when actually he just took money off them. So councils going to the wall, again, is not something a Labour government really wants to do. And what do we do about that? And some of the answer is not, unfortunately, going to be throw money at everything, because that's not going to be possible to begin with. Actually, I'll just come on to a comment here before I go into the next one. So there's some talk here. So this may be related. I'm only catching bits of this. I have noticed there's some reports of nervousness in Labour that they might lose a few seats, which is possible, of course. I mean, the whole point is when you are... I mean, they've been so efficient with their vote that they're going to win seats that they really had no business winning. And in return, they may lose a couple of seats that a few years ago should have been easy wins. And someone's mentioned there that Debonair is at risk. She's Bristol Central, isn't she? So that is obvious. I mean, that's a big green target. She's the Shadow Culture Secretary. So she may lose her job. I'll tell you what I find interesting. There's a couple of senior Labour politicians where it's actually quite funny in some ways, as in, gallows humour type of thing. In that, the various people who are, making this out to be, this is because of Labour's position on Gaza, which will be an influential factor. It won't be the whole factor. Most of it, even the Green Party, the ones leading the Green Party actually say it's actually very little to do with that. It's mostly really because Labour are now being seen already as the government, as this establishment thing. And there are some people who go, well, actually, there are some people who naturally gravitate towards almost like a counter voice. So then it's well, if Labour are going to be the establishment, well, we'll back the Green Party. So it's actually much more to do with that than anything else. But nonetheless, it will be weirdly bizarre if Labour lose a couple of their most senior well, Asian MPs, to be honest, and over Gaza, and they're replaced by posh middle class white people from the Green Party or something. But yeah, in terms of like, there's various people going around going, oh, there's a group trying to reckon that Wes Streeting's in trouble. Wes Streeting's not in trouble. There's a group trying to reckon they've got Starmer on the run. They're going to take Starmer's seat. They're not taking Starmer's seat. There's basically, you've got the ones that are tricky for Labour, the ones they could lose. You've got Bristol Central. I mean, you look at the polling, you'd probably say the Greens are the most likely to win that. I don't think it's consistent across all pollsters, but I think the average is the Greens probably take that. Then you've got one of the Birmingham Ladywood, is it? I think Birmingham Ladywood looks a bit dicey, but I think Labour look like they are more likely to win that. Do I think the leader of the SNP will lose his seat in Aberdeen South? No. Do you mean Stephen Flynn? Sorry, leader of the SNP in Westminster. Stephen Flynn is in a fight for his seat, yes. I mean, a lot of the SNP Westminster MPs are in a fight for their seat. Stephen Flynn is one of them, yes. I will say on Scotland, however, the polling is not quite as solid as other places because for various reasons it would be because the polling is based on. I actually did a video on how MRPs work, and it's sort of based on your stratification element is based on like census data, and the data isn't as up to date for Scotland as it is England and Wales, which means that the polls for Scotland might have larger errors. I mean, we'll wait and see. But the other thing is, because the polls are also saying there's a lot of seats between Labour and the SNP that are quite tight, if you add on to that the extra uncertainty, there's a lot of seats we really don't know what's going to happen to. I mean, the SNP could get like 15 or they could get 30 or 35. I mean, it's really out there. But Stephen Flynn is in a bit of a battle, yeah. Ivan saying that I've stated general priorities of urgency on a personal level. Labour must sort out the Tory failures on people with autism. Labour brought in the Autism Act, but the Tories have done nothing. So, I mean, individually, lots of people have their own personal priorities or priorities for people that are close to them in their lives. Absolutely. Oh, Matthew's saying about Islington North, that would technically be a Labour loss to independent. There's nothing technical about it. It would be a Labour loss. Simple as that. So yeah, if Jeremy Corbyn won that, it's very difficult to say. So obviously, Islington North is an interesting one. The word on the ground is that Labour are likely to win it. Then there was someone, I don't really like to platform, but there's someone called Stats for Lefties, you may know on Twitter, who is a grifter. Some of them are just like what I would call useful idiots or, whatever. But he is, because I've actually engaged with him about his polling methods are like fantasies. They're the stuff of fantasy. And I thought at first he was just like doing it the lazy way or something like that. And he knows he's using the wrong methods. He knows he's fiddling it, his stats. So he is just a grifter. So he produced a constituency poll, which had Jeremy Corbyn winning with like 54% of the vote or something. And then, ironically, a genuine constituency poll was commissioned by, ironically, this guy, Stats for Lefty, in conjunction with Novara Media. So they both stumped up the £7,000 to do a constituency poll. And the constituency poll said that Labour are going to win it. And it looked quite comfortable for Labour. However, I would caution this with constituency polls. It may be surprising to some people, but they're actually technically really bad with independents. It's really annoying because if you've got a prominent independent, as North Islington does in the form of Jeremy Corbyn, so if you've got a really strong independent candidate, an MRP poll can't really tell you what's going on there. A voting intention poll certainly can't. Really, so then you think to yourself, well, a dedicated constituency poll then. And it's like, yeah, unfortunately, dedicated constituency polls have a really bad track record with independents. For example, there was a constituency done. There was a constituency poll done for Batley and Spen when George Galloway ran up against Kim Ledbetter, and it got his share of the vote tragically wrong. There's been other cases as well, and sometimes it massively downplays the independents' share of the vote, and usually, it massively overplays it. So if that Islington North constituency poll is typical of constituency polls, actually Labour will be winning more comfortably than it said. But because it can sometimes go the other way. So I don't even know. I mean, I'm not going to stand here and say Labour are definitely going to win it. Just even though that constituency poll put Labour 14 points ahead, that's really comfortable. That's way beyond the margin for error. But because constituency polls are actually really bad when it comes to judging the vote share of an independent, no idea. Should I feel betrayed that Starmer seems to be supporting first past the post with a ridiculous statement? It comes strong government. So I do need to do a video on this. I keep getting distracted with other things. It's not a helpful comment. I'm not going to try and justify the comment. What I would say is this just really quickly before because at some point I do need to do a video on it, but I don't know when that will be now. But it does need to be before the election, I feel. What I would say is, so Keir Starmer, and you've said it yourself, he said, first past the post creates strong governments. So, right, here's the thing. Look at the last 14 years, right? Now, the first 5 of those years were the coalition years. So that's the sort of thing that would have happened even with a proportional representation system, yeah? So that's not a feature of first past the post. Even though it's a first past the post system that gave it to us, a proportional representation system is much more keyed towards that sort of thing. And yet, those 5 years of coalition were the most stable of those 14 years. Would you agree? I would say so. They were the most stable. Because since then, what's happened since 2015 and the coalition years ended? We had a parliament that lasted for just over 2 years. Then we had another one that lasted for 2.5 years. Then we had another one that lasted the full term but had 3 different prime ministers in it. So ask yourself this. Does Keir Starmer really believe, and from 2015 onwards, this was pure first past the post, because a proportional system would not have delivered these governments. It could have delivered the coalition government of 2010 to 2015. It could not have delivered the ones from 2015 onwards. So ask yourself this. Does Keir Starmer genuinely believe that the governments since 2015 have been strong governments? I would argue he doesn't believe that, and I'll tell you why. First of all, because I don't think he's an idiot. Second of all, Labour have been making a lot of the fact that the Tories have been chaotic since 2015. 5 prime ministers in basically 6 years. They've made a lot of that. So Labour's formal campaign line has been about the chaos. So, yeah, it's one of these things. What's Starmer lying about? Is he lying about first past the post being good, or is he lying about the last 9 years being stable, strong governments? Strong and stable. Which is he lying about? He's got to be lying about one of them. So that's how I would look at that. But the comment was still unhelpful. I don't really see the need for it, even with the Ming vars and all the rest of it. Why was first past the post more stable pre-2010? So what made it... It wasn't actually first past the post that made the governments unstable since 2015. It was Brexit that made them unstable. But if we'd have had proportional representation, there wouldn't have been a majority of Parliament who were interested in going along with Brexit for any reason. Because apart from anything else, like in a coalition, I mean, if one particular party has a difficulty, an internal difficulty over a policy, the other parties don't care about that. It's like, can you function? If not, we'll just get different coalition partners. So, it's, you don't, I mean, what we've had since 2015 is the country being flushed down the drain for the sake of, as Starmer describes it, a Tory psychodrama. So Yeah, it wasn't first past the post that made the government unstable. It's Brexit that made it unstable, but it's because we had first past the post that Brexit was allowed to destabilise it, because it was one party having all of the power without a majority of the public backing them. Is there anything we need to do before the election happens in order to make PR more likely? Yes. So, you want to organise. There are groups who exist to promote electoral reform. I'd describe it as that rather than PR, because there's different types. But electoral reform. And my number one advice, if you are a Labour member, is to join the Labour campaign for electoral reform. I cannot overstate how many people must be in Labour that are pro-EU, and if they would just join Labour campaign for electoral reform, then this would move way more quickly. The more members they get, the better. But if you are outside of Labour, I mean, you can still join them outside of Labour, but that doesn't bring them quite as much power. I suppose it's a bit more money. But Labour campaign for electoral reform also work closely with other groups pushing for it, and there are groups outside of Labour as well. So you can join those, like Make Votes Matter, for example, or there's the Electoral Reform Society. There's the various other groups who do work together. They can't formally work together at the moment because, remember, funding purposes. If these groups formally work together, then they have to pull their funding, which is ridiculous. So, but they talk to each other. So that's the most important thing, organise. And my advice is, if you sign up to stopthetories.vote, not just for your tactical voting, they are trying to get a group of people together, and there's a lot on their mailing list now, and the more the merrier, because the idea is to, where you're going to vote tactically, for those who are going to vote tactically, contact the MP, the candidate at the moment, the candidate that you are backing. And there's ways to contact them using stopthetories.vote. It lets you message them, or it shows you how to message them. There's links for that. And you can contact them saying, I am voting tactically for you because I want electoral reform. And then what you can do is, after the election, you can contact them again if they win. If they don't win, obviously no point. But if they win, you can say, right, I was one of the people that voted tactically for you. I want electoral reform. And, if particularly new MPs who relied on those tactical votes to win their seats get 300, 400, 500 emails all saying the same thing, not exactly the same thing, but in your own words, the same, we want electoral reform. That's a lot. I will refer you back to 2020, when Boris Johnson was trying to starve kids in poverty over the first COVID summer. And Tory MPs were trying to get him to U-turn. They eventually forced him to U-turn. And it was on the basis of the fact they said they were getting hundreds of emails. Now, that is unusual for an MP. They don't get hundreds of emails about the same thing. If they do, they know it's a major issue in their constituency. So if you can have hundreds of people emailing an MP that has won a tight contest, and if you've got, and they might have only won it by a few hundred or a few thousand, if you've got hundreds of people saying, I voted for you, but I voted tactically, I didn't vote for your manifesto, I voted tactically because I want you to help deliver electoral reform. Anyway, that's the best thing to do. Right, should we go down? We'll carry on down the list of the I think the civil service, I don't know what the civil service, I've seen a report are putting together what they're calling a black swan list, which I imagine has, obviously I've not seen, they're not showing it to me. But I think internally Labour are calling it the shit list of things to deal with. So we've got the Port Talbot thing there, that's a new one. We've got councils going bankrupt. Then we've got public sector pay issues. So Wes Streeting has committed as Health Secretary. I think it's obviously Keir Starmer can make whoever he likes Health Secretary when he's Prime Minister, but it's going to be Wes Streeting. He's not actually going to lose his seat. And he said on day one, he will be meeting with the BMA junior doctors to deal with the strike action. And obviously because their main beef, they've got several beefs to be fair, but because their main one is on pay, their pay has suffered just like everyone else's over the past 15, 16 years. It's he's going to have to give them some indication of a direction of travel on pay. That's got to be part of the talks. So as soon as West, and again, I'm making a lot of assumptions here because I don't know what but I can't imagine he's planning on going, oh, can you just call off the strikes and give us a few months? I imagine he's got to give, not like an immediate pay rise, but give them a commitment to a direction of travel that is acceptable. So assuming he can do that, all of a sudden, every other public sector worker in the country will go, well, hang on a minute, what about us now? So that's going to start. I mean, it's not just the BMA either. I think ASLEF still haven't agreed. Am I right about that? Is there anyone who knows about the train drivers? I don't think they've agreed yet either, from memory. So that'll be another one to deal with, but that won't be West Streeting, of course. So I reckon there could be a chain reaction of discussions on public sector pay. So that's something that needs sorting quickly. Granted, some may decide, say I don't like to say I don't like Wes Streeting. I just think his manner rubs people up the wrong way. Like, he's on top of his brief. He knows his stuff. He's intelligent. I don't mind him being a Secretary of State. I don't think I'd want him to be leader at any point in the future, unless he has a massive personality change. But I don't like to sort of say I don't like negativity. So I don't like, maybe it's like my teacher, like when you're trained to be a teacher, and a kid will go, oh, because like if you're on a kid all the time, because they're basically arseholes, they go, oh, you don't like me. You're taught as a teacher to say, I do like you, I don't like your behaviour. And maybe, I don't know whether it's me or just all of that experience as a teacher, but that tends to be how I approach people. So rather than approaching people as I don't like you, I think there are a small number of people who are so reprehensible I actually don't like them. So I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like Jacob Rees-Mogg. I don't like Nigel Farage. But the list isn't huge. With most people, my attitude is, I don't like this behaviour, but I do like that behaviour. So can we have more of the good behaviour and not so much of the bad behaviour? So that's what I would say. But I would just say with Wes Streeting, there are too many behaviours that I just don't think are helpful. But at the same time, he seems perfectly competent as a politician. So, leave him where he is. Although I would have been happier had he been in a different position. I'd have been happy if he'd have been Education Secretary. I'd have been completely comfortable with him as Education Secretary. But anyway, Streeton said he won't discuss the 35% increase the BMA. No, he said he won't be able to deliver the 35% that they want. He hasn't said he won't talk about it. He hasn't ruled out talking about anything. He's just said we can't afford 35%. That's all he said. And the BMA have said they understand that as well. Really, I don't think there's going to be aggro. It doesn't make sense for him to come away from that meeting under a cloud. That'd be mad. There'd be no need for that. The BMA are not exactly a militant union, are they? Let's be honest. If Labour cannot come to some accord with the BMA, God help them. God help them. Anyway, let's go down the list because someone's trying to add more in here. There may well be more. But I'm talking about the ones literally on... what I'm talking about here, this list, things that you probably can't even leave to your first week. Like Port Talbot, literally they're threatening to close the blast furnaces down next week, or the week after, I should say. So, obviously they can't leave that. Councils going bankrupt, they're going bankrupt right now. So, okay, some councils you might be able to leave it a bit, but others ones you can't. Public sector pay issues, we know Wes Streeting's having a meeting, he said on day one. I don't know what day one actually means. I don't think it means next Friday, but because it takes a few days to form the government. But the week after next, that has to happen, and that will trigger a whole chain reaction. Thames Water collapsing. Okay, I don't know technically when it'll collapse, but surely that is a thing that will have to be dealt with over summer. The prisons are breaking again in a week. We're in July, like next week, I think we're expecting prisons full again. So. And there's no solution to that other than to do what the Conservatives have been doing and release more prisoners early. So Labour, with that one, they've got to turn it into there's actually nothing we can do about this in the short term. We are going to deal with it, but we are just going to have to keep doing what the Conservatives were doing. That's their policy. We just have to continue it. Universities collapsing, obviously that's immediate. Universities, or some of them are already, their courses are already collapsing for next year. So that's an immediate problem. NHS budget shortfalls, you obviously can't leave that. We want to start reducing the severity of NHS winter crises, which means having to act immediately. And then public building collapses. Another hospital collapsed last week, didn't it? A bit of a hospital. So it's there's got to be a plan for, I suppose, dealing. I don't actually know, but there's got to be a plan for triaging it. Sorry to use the word triage, which might be to do with hospitals, but you've got to decide. So what is best? Is it best to protect the ones that still haven't collapsed? Get the rebuilding plan in for ones that have, and those ones, absolutely mental. Uncle Social saying there, the recent debacle over the Trump-Biden debate, something the UK should be worried about. The UK will be worried about it. In fact, two things, like Keir Starmer, when he becomes Prime Minister, he's got 2 international meetings straight away. There's I think there's a NATO meet. Is the NATO meeting first? They're going to be talking about Trump, because they know straight away when it comes to Ukraine, that's a bit dodgy. So there's going to be that straight away. And then there's going to be another meeting, largely with the EU, but it's other countries as well, to discuss various things, which is being hosted in this country as well. So he's got international meetings as well. Trump is going to come up in both of them. Because there's a lot of world leaders going to be worried about that one. The world leader who should be most worried about it is Joe Biden. Unfortunately, he seems the least worried. But there it is. We'll just have to deal with that. So someone was, sorry, I missed it now. Someone was trying to throw in another little thing for the shit list. I've now forgotten it. Oh, do I think Labour will relax civil service pay restraint on the bits of the CS that are not taxpayer funded, example charge fees that cover all their costs? I honestly couldn't tell you. What I do think is that Keir Starmer is a very, very, very pragmatic person. And I think he's built a fairly pragmatic team together. And I think what they will do is Starmer's already made the point, and he's been open about it. He doesn't constrain himself with ideology, which is a good thing. He has an ideology. We all have anyone interested in politics has an ideology, and we believe that ideology. But we also have to accept that, if you've got a problem, you will be presented with certain solutions, and they're going to have to pick whatever will be deemed that solution. And let us make no bones about it. It may well be that some of the solutions they apply give short-term gains in return for longer-term problems. Now, I'm hoping we're not going to go anything like, because you might instantly think when I say something like that, oh, that sounds a bit like PFI, Phil. Yeah, exactly. So I'm hoping we're not talking about too much of that, but I can still see so much shit that needs dealing with as quickly as possible that they decide that it is in the long-term interest to make decisions that deal with it in the short term and then worry about the long-term problems later. So there's a potential of that. Will Lindsay Hoyle remain Speaker? I strongly suspect so, yes. My view of Lindsay Hoyle, he hasn't been a good Speaker in this Parliament, but I would put that down to the fact that this Parliament was a Parliament of rogues. A parcel of rogues, as the SNP would say, quoting Ravi Burns there. But they've absolutely been rogues. Absolutely disgusting behaviour. People have sort of described him as like a supply teacher, and I think that's right. I've been a supply teacher. I've been there, and it's right, and that's what it is. It's like with a parliament of MPs that largely respect the function of Parliament. I think he'll be fine. I don't think there's a problem with Lindsay Hoyle at all. I think his problem was in dealing with miscreants when he ultimately had very little power to do so. There were some times when he did have powers and he should have exercised them a bit more. But ultimately, you had a band of rogues in there who had no respect for Parliament, no respect at all. And someone like Hoyle just couldn't deal with that. So I think it will be. I think it'll keep him. I don't see any reason not to. I also don't think there was anyone better lined up. Like, you try and think about who could have dealt with that last Parliament. I could only think of Betty Boothroyd. Unfortunately, she's died. And she'd gone to the Lords anyway, so it'd be too late to bring her back. Is there a precedent for opposition parties to form a coalition to become the official opposition? No, not at all. I have now checked on this, and the Institute for Government have pronounced on it. None at all. It's always been the case that the largest opposition has been able to handle leading the opposition. So if we get a situation where, like, the Tories and the Lib Dems are both on, like, roughly 70 seats or something, we are into new territory. And Parliament will have to deal with that. At the end of the day, I mean, the rules are the rules, but MPs can change the rules whenever they like. They are sovereign. Our Parliament is sovereign, does what it likes. Don't say there. Civil service pay has been frozen and suppressed for 15 years. Time to start giving them rise above inflation. Absolutely, 100%. You do not. I mean, when I talk about they need to start having a plan for a decent direction of travel, that direction of travel has to by definition be above inflation. Otherwise, you're not going forwards, are you? Anything that is below or at inflation is at best treading water. But anyway, but again, I will just say it was a very different situation economically. Granted, Labour had more scope in 97, but in 97, I can say as a teacher, but it happened in other public sectors as well, but I can tell you for certain in teaching that Labour made no promises on teachers' pay in 97 before the election. And yet, in their first Parliament, 4 years, the starting salary for teachers went up by about 26 or something %. So, you know, they didn't promise to, but they did it anyway. I think Labour, do you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that Labour understand the need for public sector pay to be strong in order to attract people into the public sector to work there. Because where Labour are coming in, and they're not idiots, they're saying it themselves. You know, you've got teachers leaving the profession when they want to bring more in. You've got people leaving the NHS when they need to bring people in. You know, you've got... and they know that pay is a big part of it. Pay and conditions, but pay is a big part of it. So, yeah. Yeah, James saying, we can't throw money at everything. Labour is come up with half the cash for some of these problems. But they do know... So although Labour are saying we can't just spend our way to growth, but they also know you also can't do it for free. So it's like you've got to invest to grow. Everyone understands that concept. Uncle Social says, I work in a government department. If my pay had risen with inflation, it would be about 7,000 better off annually since the Tories came to power. Yeah. So basically, Labour's job. See, that's the thing as well. What I would say is groups like the BMA, I think they're being very reasonable because they are essentially saying we just want our pay back up where it was. Whereas in actual fact, if we'd never let these Tories in the first place, pay would not currently be at 2010 or 2008 levels. It would be higher. So even if Labour, in the span of one Parliament, and I don't think they will be able to do this, but who knows, but even if Labour could get people's pay back up to 2010 in real terms in one Parliament, that would still be behind where they should be. And yet everyone would be fine with it. Everyone would understand that Labour had then come good. No one would complain at that. I mean, when I was a teacher through the Tory years and we were getting pay freezes, not just inflation lower than inflation pay rises, actual full pay freezes. Like, you ain't getting a penny extra this year for multiple years. And then they'd give you like 20 quid or something. And then it was back to like nothing again. So unless you were going up the pay scale, you were getting nothing. And I used to joke that I was the only person in the college getting a pay rise, because from 2015 I was doing YouTube, not this YouTube channel, I was doing a different one, but I was getting paid for doing YouTube from late 2015. So after that, I used to sit there joking with my colleagues. I seem to be the only one that's had a pay rise again this year. Someone's quoting Nye Bevan there, stuff their mouths with gold. Yeah, unfortunately, although there's a lot of people, and I completely get where they're coming from, are saying we've got, we are in a situation very much like straight after the Second World War. We have to rebuild the country. The country is in need of rebuilding. You can't actually do what they did straight after the Second World War, because that was literally as a result of someone bombing the crap out of our country. It's really hard to get people to appreciate that the same thing has just been done by their own government because they voted for that government. So, I don't think Labour can necessarily do that. At the same time, I also don't think it's reasonable to suppose they will aim to simply tinker for a few. People keep thinking they're just going to try and tinker with a bit, make things work a bit better, and then say to the electorate, right, vote for us again, we need to finish the job. Whereas I have mentioned there's been an interview with Keir Starmer and an interview with Rachel Reeves in the last week where they have both said, come the next election, things will be noticeably better. They've both said, we're not messing, we're not tinkering around the edges here. Things will be noticeably better. Now, okay, they've not been put to the test. We can be cautious of the fact that they've not been put to the test. Although Keir Starmer has actually run a government department before. So there is that. So we know he can get things done. And also they do have some ministerial experience in there. But we'll see. Can't wait to see the last food bank closed down through lack of need. Yes. I mean, there's various things. It's interesting because I am actually working on the moment on a set of metrics that I would like to judge Labour by. Now, I have to be fair on it. I don't want to just choose my own. I want to choose ones that are linked to promises they've made. But what I would say, I'm just actually going to check something here. So I'm just looking at homelessness, for example. So the manifesto says the last Labour government made huge strides in ending homelessness. Under the Conservatives, that progress has been undone with rough sleepers, an all too common sight in our towns and cities, and a sharp rise in hidden homelessness. Building on the lessons of our past, Labour will develop a new cross-government strategy, working with mayors and councils across the country to put Britain back on track to ending homelessness. So straight away, one metric we can use is like how many people are going to be homeless now, how many people are going to be homeless at the end of this parliament, because they haven't promised to end it in this one parliament, but they have promised to put us back on track to ending it. So, it's reasonable to then talk about, we can measure that, and we could say, are you on a trajectory to ending homelessness by the end of this coming parliament? Now, if I look up food banks, I don't think they've promised to end food banks. I can't even see food bank mentioned in the manifesto. Let's have a look. No, so food banks aren't mentioned in the manifesto. So although we could maybe use food banks or food bank use rather than the number of food banks as a metric on their commitments to poverty, they haven't made a specific promise about wanting to end the need for food banks. They do have specific promises on poverty, however, so you could use it as a metric, I guess. What's my preferred way to measure economic performance? GDP per capita in real terms. That's my preferred. GDP per capita, because our economy has not grown in real terms since the Tories took over, but where they do claim GDP growth, it tends to be as a result, ironically, of immigration. Our GDP per capita has not grown. Sorry if there's adverts in there. I can't. They've changed something recently on it. It's like, yeah, there's not a lot I can do other than just stop them altogether, and then sometimes I forget to put them back at the end. But anyway, food banks aren't part of the finished budget, but then again, neither are the homeless. No. I mean, the other thing is Starmer has said in Parliament, as leader of the Labour Party, that homelessness is a political choice. So they really, within the 10-year decade of renewal thing, it's reasonable to suggest they should be ending it, which means it's also reasonable to suggest that by the end of the next Parliament, when they go to the next election, they should have made massive improvements on the level of homelessness. Pandemic response unit mentioned. Oh, that's a good one. I don't recall. Let's have a look. Pandemic. Oh dear. Hang on, here it is, I think. It says, in regards to pandemic, develop an NHS innovation adoption strategy to include a plan for procurement, given a clearer route to get products into the NHS, coupled with reformed incentive structures to drive innovation, faster regulatory approval for new technology medicines. So they do sort of mention pandemic plans in there. I don't know that they mention a specific pandemic response unit, but I mean, it would be an obvious thing to have. Again, they haven't made a specific promise about it, but they have made a specific promise to have pandemic preparedness as part of the NHS thinking, which means there must be someone in charge of that. So the implication must be there would be a unit in charge of that. When I mentioned the Christmas period last year, you were seeing noticeable drop in ad revenue. It was during the height of ad blockers versus YouTube, was it? I think it was also in conjunction with a knackered value of the pound as well, though, and very low advertising revenues, because there were also, like, ITV were complaining about it. I don't think people use ad blockers on ITV, if I'm honest. Rees-Mogg finds food banks heartwarming, not stomach filling, but heartwarming. What a man and a monster. Yeah, because this is what they're like. This is what these rich Tories are like. They love charity because it's like saying to poor people, you look after your own so that we don't have to pay any taxes for you. You know, because that's what they think about. Well, we obviously pay you very generously if you can afford to give to charity. So, you know, what are you going to spend your 50p a week on anyway? So, you know, help each other out while I just enjoy my smoked salmon. Do I think that Labour have been so milk-toast in their public appearance during this general election because of the right-wing media? Sorry for repeating this question. Not necessarily. I mean, Labour have got some decent media performers, and they've got other ones who are not so great. Rachel Reeves isn't bad. David Lamb is decent. Ed Miliband's all right under the right circumstances. Jonathan Reynolds is all right. Keir Starmer's not. That was priced in at the start. We knew that was the case. Keir Starmer is not a good media performer. He's not a good politician. But that was priced in. Everyone who supported Keir Starmer for the leader knew that. None of us were under any illusions. We saw him as someone whom the public would have faith in, confidence in, which has turned out to be the case. Because for everyone, like, there's obviously people on the left and the right at the moment going, oh, Keir Starmer is really unpopular. He's the most popular politician in the country. The fact that his approval rating is technically negative, although it depends how you measure it, there are, in terms of who people think would make the best prime minister, it's positive, but then that's because it's between two people. But in terms of, you know, like isolated approval rating, yeah, it's negative. But it's less negative than for literally every other politician in the country. So, and it's also less negative than it was for Boris Johnson when Boris Johnson won his large majority in 2019. So, if someone who is as clearly as uncharismatic and let's be honest, he's like a rabbit caught in headlights when he's on a media interview. If someone who looks like a panicked rabbit in front of a camera can actually be the most popular politician in the country and more popular than the much more at ease Boris Johnson in 2019, then do you know what? He's not doing too badly. That's his weakness. If he's not doing badly on his main weakness, then we've got hope here. Obviously, I don't know how his popularity is going to stand up in government. For that, he needs to deliver. And I don't just mean deliver in terms of policy. He does need to become more accomplished, I think. But maybe he will become more confident when he's actually got, instead of saying to people, I can deliver this, once he can say, I have delivered this, maybe he'll relax a bit. Who knows? Does anyone know if Jeremy Hunt is still alive? He's not appeared publicly since the election, of course. No, he has. Oh, yeah, he is. He's out and about every day in his constituency. He's chasing it. He's absolutely chasing it. He's losing. Jeremy Hunt. Do you know what? I don't want to predict too much about this election, but Jeremy Hunt's losing his seat. In fact, I was actually noticing earlier, apparently there's a bit of panic going on in Richmond and Northallerton. So basically, Richmond Park. Rishi Sunak is like on a cat on a hot tin roof there. I get the impression, there's all sorts of like many a slip between twixt cup and lip, but I'm getting the impression Rishi Sunak's actually really worried about his own seat. Now, I'll tell you something. If Rishi Sunak, because it is possible, it's there, enough tactical voting against Sunak, he could absolutely lose his seat. At the same time, I would say it's probably unlikely he loses his seat, looking at polling anyway, looking at MRP polling. But if he thinks his activists on the ground think there's something to worry about, if Rishi Sunak can lose his seat, there's a whole raft of Tory seats that they probably were confident about that they're even more vulnerable. So basically, if Rishi Sunak loses his seat, that's when you're in Ed Davey's leader of the opposition territory, because for him to lose his seat, right load of Tories have to lose theirs. So you could end up with a situation next week where, and I don't think this has ever happened, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and the Home, because James Cleverly's not looking too clever, he's safer than Hunt, but not as safe as Sunak. So if Sunak can lose his seat, Cleverly can lose his seat. So you could have the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and the Home Secretary all losing their seats. Now, that's 3 of the top 4 positions in government. The other one being Foreign Secretary, but the Foreign Secretary is not standing, so he can't lose his seat. He's safely tucked up in the House of Lords. Do I think it's possible the housing bill could come in over some of just the Section 21 ban? I don't think it will just be the Section 21 ban. But if I look at, let's again go refer to the manifesto. It doesn't make sense just to put the Section 21 in it. Let me have a look here. Security also means having a secure roof over your head. That is not the case for too many renting their homes privately. Labour will legislate where the Conservatives have failed, overhauling the regulation of the private rented sector. We will immediately abolish Section 21 no-fault evictions, prevent private renters being exploited and discriminated against, empower them to challenge unreasonable. So actually what they're saying is it's not just going to be Section 21. So because they say immediately abolish Section 21 and then they list a load of other things they're going to do as well, yeah, I think there's going to be a bill this summer that deals with multiple issues. That's how I read that. Yeah, Frank's saying last Saturday under Tory rule. Exactly. This is the last Saturday of this Conservative government. Tomorrow will be the last Sunday. Monday will be the last Monday. Tuesday will be the day I have to go into hospital to have my head stabbed. So that won't be very nice. But it will at least be the last Tuesday where it's a Conservative government and I'm getting my head stabbed. So there will be that. What a sublime thought. No Sunak, Cleverly, Hunt or Mogg. I don't know why people put so much store on Rees-Mogg. I'm not even giving Rees-Mogg a second thought. And yet there's all these people. I've seen an article in The Guardian about it. Let him go. He's gone. He's finished. He's not winning. He's losing. He's gone. He's finished. I'm more interested in the ones that are more in, Liz Truss for me would be a big one. She would be a big one. That's very much in the balance as far as I can tell. I'm looking at some polls that go, ooh, she could be gone. I'm looking at others that go, oh, she's probably just going to sneak it. So I don't really know about that one. But she would be a big one. Obviously, Kemi Badenoch would be huge, but I've got a sneaking suspicion she's going to keep her seat. I think it's too hard for people to know the tactical vote there. The tactical vote is Labour, but I don't know how many people know that. Because it's a funny sort of place, Northwest Essex. It's very much a constituency of two bits. And there's a big old chunk of it, the tactical choice with Lib Dem. And yet there's another chunk of it going to vote tactically Labour. So Lee Anderson's got a great chance of winning Mog. Lee Anderson could win. Lee Anderson could absolutely win his seat. There are some, like I said, there are some seats that a few years ago you would have said would be solidly Labour that they could absolutely lose. And the tankies are going to be all over it. They're going, oh, you lost those 5 seats. It's like, yeah, but we won an extra 250. So, we'll take that. Because they don't understand how elections work. I'd love to see Philp lose his seats. I can't remember where he sits, but I'm pretty sure I've checked him out before. I think he is losing. Johnny Mercer, I think he's gone. Johnny Mercer is gone. I think he knows he's gone as well. Penny Mordaunt's gone, but I have no special antipathy towards Penny Mordaunt. I mean, beyond the fact that she's a Tory, I have. There are some Tories where I would say I don't mind if you hang about, like Tobias Ellwood, but at the same time, there are no Tories I would go, I'll be secretly pleased if you win your seat. As far as I'm concerned, they can all lose their seats. I can see Starmer becoming a great leader once he finds his footing. So I'm more cynical than that. I do worry about his lack of natural political inclination. I'll tell you what's been cropping up a little bit over the last week or so. Little clips of Tony Blair. And there was one that's been flashing up today on Twitter where he took on someone in the audience of question. He actually argued with it. When I was taking the piss out of Rishi Sunak for arguing with the audience at question time. Well, that's because he argued with the audience. Whereas Tony Blair was arguing with this one guy who was a Conservative. And he wasn't being rude or anything or petulant. He was just like tearing his arguments apart. And that's the thing. I mean, I wasn't exactly a fan of Blair. But bloody hell, he was a good politician. He just beat all comers in a debate. It didn't matter who they were. He was, if you could have a Labour leader with that quality, without the ego and the bollocks that came with it, why, you would have a leader. You would have something else. Is Ian Duncan Smith definitely gone? Oh, I can't remember. Again, there are some of these characters that, as far as I'm concerned, are has-beens. So I don't, I let them go. Ian Duncan Smith is a deeply unpleasant man. But is he really, even if he wins his seat, is he actually going to do that much harm? If he's part of a dwindling number of Conservative MPs, I don't think so. So I haven't really checked Ian Duncan Smith, because as far as I'm concerned, he's like Drake of Rees-Mogg. They've done their damage. I don't think they've got more damage to do. So I just leave them. Whereas people like Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, people like that have got more damage to do. So those are the ones that I focus on. Will Penny Mordaunt be allowed to keep her sword? No, she doesn't have a real sword. I have a real sword. She doesn't. She borrowed it for that day. If Reform do well and multiple Tories cross the floor to Reform, and then Reform have more seats than the opposition, does that make them the opposition? Yeah. Okay. This isn't going to happen, by the way. But the opposition, the official opposition, is literally the party with the most seats. That's it. Or second most seats, technically. The most seats on the opposition benches. So, generally speaking, that is the party with the second greatest number of MPs. And, you vote for a candidate, not a party in an election, even though the party goes down on the ballot. So in theory, yeah, okay, if the Conservatives if they won 80 MPs and Reform won, say, 20, and then 60 Conservative MPs joined Reform UK, so Reform UK had 80 MPs, yes, they would be the opposition. They would be leading the opposition. It's not going to happen. It's mad. William Hague was an excellent politician, was just in the wrong party. Yes, you could argue that. You can always argue that of many people, I suppose. But William Hague, again, he was very much like me in that he became very interested in politics very young. I didn't get so interested that I wanted to attend party conferences or anything when I was a young lad. But, so he was very experienced. But he had no chance, William Hague. He had absolutely no chance. The Tories their reputation was utterly shot. Labour did very well in their first term. 1997 to 2001 was an absolute blinder. It was superb. It was just a shame that they didn't really... after that, they still won 2 more elections. Well, they won 2001 on the strength of that. And then, of course, they won 1 more election after that, I suppose. Really on the basis that the Conservatives still hadn't sorted themselves out. 2005 was a masterclass in efficiency of the vote from the campaign point of view, but it was not a masterclass in confidence from the public. They won 35% of the vote in 2005. And that is because they had this one stunning parliament, 1997 to 2001, one absolute stunner. And then they just sort of... they still made improvements. Things were still getting better. Don't get me wrong. They were still doing their job. But it was like their ambition, they were just like carrying on a road rather than... It's like they coasted, is what we would call in teaching. They coasted. So we have to hope that Labour keep their hunger this time. Is my sword legal? Well, I'm not allowed to hit anyone with it, but it's a replica. It's a replica fantasy sword. I'm illegally allowed to have it. It's an ornament. It's not very practical as a sword either, I have to say. It's very uncomfortable to hold. It's very heavy. We will get another YouGov MRP poll. Oh, yeah. We will absolutely get another... Like, the MRP... If any pollster... Really, obviously they have to be commissioned, but if any pollster wants to really boast about their MRP polls, they need one to come out just before the actual election. So as far as I understand, we've gone over time here, actually. I need to call it. So Opinion should have they were launching theirs at 8 o'clock today, so they presumably have already brought theirs out. And they are still bringing another one out. So Opinion, there's one that should be out now. In fact, I've just seen it. Oh, hold on. Oh, this is just a voting intention poll. That's rubbish. But yeah, I'm sure YouGov will have another MRP poll next week. Because otherwise that'd be mad. Because their last one, where is it? The last one was published on the 19th of June. So that's already 10 days. And that was when it was published. The field work took place, days before then. So yeah, YouGov will have another one out. Which sword is it? It's Frostmourne. But anyway, is it a chainsaw? No, it's not a chainsaw. It's not a 40k one. It's a World of Warcraft one. Or technically Warcraft. Why are Tories saying their data's right? I don't know what you mean by that. But their data will be right. Their data's telling them they're losing very badly. So they are... Yeah, the Tories know they're losing. And they know they're losing very badly. The fact of the matter is, like, the polls aren't going to be that badly wrong. Basically, what's going to happen is Labour are going to get 430 to 450 seats, I guess. The Conservatives are going to get 70 to 100 seats-ish. The Lib Dems 50 to 70 is what I imagine is going to happen. It's very difficult to say, particularly with Labour, because a lot of those Scottish seats are very difficult to judge. But, that's what we're looking at. So, okay, people who'd seen polls that were claiming 500 for Labour, they weren't real polls. They were voting intention polls. You know, so the results will be what they are. They'll come as a surprise to a lot of people. I'm seeing anecdotal cases of people claiming that, you know, people they're talking to who are not fully tuned on to politics, they're interested but not fully tuned on, they don't realise Labour on for a massive landslide. So there's going to be a lot of people in the country surprised by the results. But the results are going to be in line with what the polls have said broadly. But anyway, we'll have to call it. We've gone well over, I'm afraid. I've got ice cream waiting for me. YouGov have Labour. Hold on. Oh, 23% ahead. Lib Dems on 15 up 3. So it depends whether do you mean the MRP or the vote. There's actually a big disparity between voting intention polls and MRP polls in terms of vote share. So it'll be interesting to see which one's right there. Because you can, of course, get a vote share from MRP polls. And voting intention polls are generally inflating Reform UK share of the vote and downgrading Labour's share of the vote, as well as the Conservatives. So it'll be interesting to see which is correct. I struggle to believe that Labour are going to get less than 40% of the vote. I can believe about 42. I would be more willing to believe 42 sounds more like it. You know, some of these polls that are saying 38, 39, I'm thinking, you can't rule it out. And we don't know what's going to happen in terms of voter apathy or voter ID. And there's been a lot of postal votes going, but then that's going to hurt Conservatives more than anyone else, apart from maybe in Scotland where there's got a particular problem. So it's very difficult to know. But a lot of these voting intention polls that have Labour on sub 40, they don't really pass the sniff test for me. How am I celebrating the results? I'm going to make Welsh rarebit in the morning. I was going to have a full Aberdeen Angus based roast dinner in the afternoon, but Royal Mail knackered my Aberdeen Angus. So that's not happening. So instead what I've said is I'm going to take us all out for it. There's a pub about 15 minutes walk away that actually cooks its food properly. None of this crap pub grub shit that, you know, I could cook better myself. They actually cook things from scratch properly. They're really nice steaks. So what I've said is I'll take us all out for tea in the afternoon. So I'll do my... So basically the plan is for next week, for next Thursday, there'll be a stream at 10 o'clock for the exit poll. That'll be a normal stream like this. So members in the chat. Then on Friday morning from 10:30, I'm going to do a stream which will be open up like I did the other week when the election was called. So that'll be a bit mad. But that will cover Keir Starmer becoming Prime Minister. Because all things going as expected, he should be going to the palace at about 11 o'clock in the morning. So I'll start the stream from about 10:30, do it till about midday. So that'll be in lieu of the 12 o'clock video, probably, unless I do a 12 o'clock one as well anyway, just for the hell of it. And not Weatherspoons, no. Many reasons why not Weatherspoons. I should disable the ads for the live stream. I may have to try that. I did try that one time and then turn them back on afterwards, and then I forgot, but maybe I should, because it's getting a bit piss-taking now. They didn't used to be like this. I don't know why it's behaving like this. But the... where was I? Yeah, and then I'll do another video in the afternoon, which will have presumably be the proper results analysis, because we should have virtually all the results by then. And then I'll take us all out for dinner. Not you. You're not invited. But I shall take my fiancée and her daughters out for a nice tea at a pub called the White Bear, which actually does cook things very nicely. Does nice food, cooked properly by a proper chef, which is rare enough these days. Don't think Gordon Ramsay would be able to complain at them. But there we go anyway. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. All getting very exciting now. Have a great rest of evening. Until next time, I'll see you later.